Zero funding and 1.5 FTEs assigned to this on a daily basis. It's Roman and myself, 0.75 of each of us, maybe 0.8 for him and a little less for me, but everything has to flow through us. And what the interesting thing is, we have a lot of very talented engineers on my team, but very few of them really understand applications like Roman does and like I do. They tend to be more traditional network-facing engineers, and we're actually, one of my engineers I'm starting to bring into the fold to start explaining how this stuff works. Originally, when we put this program together, I just thought that if you're a security person, you could get this stuff. But again, what I'm finding is it's not so obvious, and it's helped me deal with the people who we're dealing with, because maybe it's not so obvious, and maybe our documentation needs to be cleaner. Maybe we need to put our message ahead and make that a little better. But at the end of the day, it's just two of us doing all this work.
And we are actually constantly revising. We're trying to improve on the process. We get feedback from people, from our vendors, from our consultants that work with us. And like David said, when one of the guys says, "Oh, it draws," I says, "I know you're not gonna like this. I know you're not gonna like that." He comes back and gives us feedback and says, "Well, what if we do it this way?" And sometimes it actually works. Sometimes we say, "Oh, great! We haven't thought of that." We try to include it in our documentation. Try to include it in our process. And next time comes around, like makes things better for everyone.
And to kind of add to that, actually, when you develop documentation over the course of a year, of like 18 months, there tends to be some inconsistency. And let me tell you, people pick up on that inconsistency and are very happy to show you where you were inconsistent. The font's different here than it is over here. I'm like, what does that have to do? Actually, do you remember that meeting?
We had that, yeah.
We actually had
that word is misspelled. And
yes,
we never thought that somebody would actually read that to that level of detail where they would say, well, this word is really misspelled.
But I'm telling you, this guy who came over to us and was very obnoxious about the fact that we misspelled the word. He was trying to cast doubt on the entire necessity of this whole process in application security because we misspelled a word in a document. So you know what? It's easy enough for us to make these edits, and now, okay, so now we're necessary, right? Because we're spelled right. But I think the key message for this whole thing is, if the city of New York can do it with no funding and 1.5 people, if you are even a not so well funded organization out in the private sector, this is doable. It is totally doable. So, questions?
Two questions. If it's just the two of you, who does the application security scanning? Is it you two or is it someone else? And where does code review come into the process?
So, we can't do code review.
Right.
There's kind of a line in there that if an application is dealing with very, very private information, we try to push the developer or the agency who's developing it to bring in a third party to do that kind of work, and we have some partnerships with some very, very good people who do that. But again, you have to go get it funded. A lot of what we do, and actually to talk about something about that actually. When someone comes in and says, "I have this application," the Marriage Bureau is a perfect example. They said, I looked at the fields they wanted to collect. They wanted to collect social security numbers. I said, "Is this necessary? Can't they just give it once they walk in the door?" And they're like, "No, we need to collect it." I said, "Well, that's going to cost you $50,000 to $60,000 for that one." Why? Well, now you have to have this thing pen tested and code review. Scurries back and comes back and eventually finds out that no, we don't really need to collect that social security number anymore. So the answer is code review. We really can't do. And in terms of scanning, we have a relationship with a managed service provider who actually does this. It's really Roman's thing.
Basically what happens is it is responsibility. We try to shift through this whole process because we're pretty much not staff. We try to shift as much responsibility as possible onto the project owner, onto the project itself. So if you want to do a project, well, you know what? You can't just provide us, with functionality of that specific project. You have to prove to us that this functionality is really secure. And what we do is we have a partnership with a vendor that basically does the scanning, the application scanning for us. And what we do is we get the results. We look at the results and we say, okay, well, here's a vulnerability here's a vulnerability there. And we're happy to walk through specific results, but the bulk of, sort of the lag work is done by the project itself. One thing I wanted to add is one of the things that we heavily rely on is data classification. So when there is a new project comes along, we say, well, what is the classification of data? Well, you know what my data is, and everybody likes to say that my data, some people actually like to say that my data is super, super secret. And we say, well, okay, well, do you have to collect this data? Well, this is going to cost you N number of dollars in order to build servers, in order to build firewalls, and all other levels of protection, besides just security review to do this. Well, no, my data is really not that sensitive. Some people do it the other way around. Well, my data is really public. Well, do you collect social security numbers? Well, yeah, we do. Well, I'm sorry, but so.
It's part of the cost of doing business.
Exactly.
I have one other question. I work for a university and it's very decentralized, and some administrative assistant on a desk can develop an application, say PHP or something like that. Do y'all have that problem, even with your budgeting process? In other words, someone who's not a developer can develop an application. It might collect somewhat sensitive data, and you never really know about it.
So yes, that happens all the time.
Yeah.
But what I will tell you is, in the city of New York, and I can't explain, well, I can explain to you why, but DNS is controlled by IT security. In every other organization out there, DNS is controlled usually by the LAN group or the Windows guys, maybe sometimes Unix group. But for some reason, we control DNS, which means that your application doesn't get a name if it
doesn't pass through the process.
Accreditation. So certainly, it's not going to get exposed to the internet because you need to point to it. So if nothing else, they'll have to use IP addresses to get to it, and it won't go live. And
as well, I mean, firewalls are controlled by IT security as well, and it's really basically the control of last resort. So if you go out and build an application, you put it on your desktop, you try to run it on your desktop. Well, yes, internally, there's nothing really we can do because we do internal scanning, we find stuff, but there's just so many that we try to hit that top 5%, and hitting the top 5%, we fix it, but there's so much that goes under the radar. But if you try to expose it to the internet, well, you have to make a firewall request. If you have to make a firewall request, well, has the application passed through the accreditation process? No. Well, sorry, we can't open a file. And we had this. We actually had this happen where we said, well, sorry.
And we have a very accelerated accreditation process at that point usually, because it's usually not a no. It's a fine. 3 days from now, they're gonna go live. Okay, but yeah.
The marriage example you were just using, where you said you couldn't use social security numbers because it would involve pen testing and so forth. Are they collecting social security numbers then when they're
Yes.
on the game? So is that being placed on a separate database and you're just using pointers, or how is that being secured now because it's becoming part of the record that was originally put in over the internet?
Suffice it to say, the external system is kind of decoupled from the internal system.
Okay.
Other than
It's just a pointer that'll go now to the social security numbers internally that can't.
yeah.
Okay.
Other than the DMV ticket, it's totally decoupled.
And we actually, this is one of the design principles that we try to follow, is anything that can be decoupled should be decoupled. Anything that doesn't need some data should not have the data.
Yeah.
Concepts of least privilege.
And to address that, oh, I'm sorry.
Did you say your policies are available?
Yes.
on the internet?
Yes, it's nyc.gov, which is where, by the way, the city's portal, it's always on, is www.nyc.gov. So you go /infosec, and the publicly classified stuff is sitting on there.
What tools do you like to use or do you have your service provider use for hosting?
So